I just keep watching this video and thinking, wow, I really had no idea, did I? Hi, I'm Rachel, and welcome back to Auxhart Gardening. So in one of the first videos I made on my channel here, I was talking about how much food I was expecting to grow in the space that I have. And let's just say things didn't quite go to plan. So today I'm going to be rewatching that video and talking about some of the things that I said, some of the things that worked out, and some of the things that definitely did not work out the way that I had planned. Alright, so first I want to talk about what I'm working with. I have a 4x16 foot bed. I have another 4x4 foot bed. And I have 14 useful containers that I'm growing in. And in terms of the food that I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to leave out things that aren't necessarily sustenance producing. So that's things like herbs, and I'm leaving out my hot peppers because while I am growing a lot of hot peppers, they're definitely not like a large volume of really edible stuff. It's more a little bit here and there for flavoring, so I'm not going to be including those. So in terms of how much food I am growing, I'm going to start out by talking about peas. I have 10 Tom Thumb pea plants, and I actually had a really hard time finding out on the internet how much these plants are actually supposed to produce. This is my first time growing them. And looking at the estimated size, I said maybe 20 to 30 pods per plant would be reasonable, which would leave me with 200 to 300 pods, somewhere thereabouts. 200 to 300 pods. I did not get even close to that. While those plants were really productive, they were this tall. And so I think each plant maybe could have given me like max 10 pods. But even then, not every plant that I had was max productive. So definitely did not get 200 to 300 pods of peas from the 10 little plants that I planted for the year. And I actually don't know how much that is in terms of how much you need to survive, because a lot of websites that I looked at, it's not that much to survive. Not that much. I tried shelling them, and A, it took forever, and B, there was even less volume left over after shelling, So it really was not that much food. They were cute though. We're looking at shelled peas and not pea pods. So I'm looking at these peas, and they'll probably be only a minor source of food for me this year. So next to my peas, I have my carrots, and I have no idea how many carrots I'm growing actually. I wish I could be more helpful with it, but let me tell you how I tried to figure out the carrots this year. So I looked at the number of seeds that come in the package that I planted. I planted a whole package of Auxhart carrots and half a package of black nebulas. And so Auxhart carrots, they said online that they can get up to be 1 pound each. And I figure most of mine won't get up to that maximum size. So I went with a conservative estimate of about half a pound per carrot there. And then black nebula are more like a regular sized carrot, even though they're very dark colored. And a regular sized carrot is about 0.13 pounds each. So what I did was I asked the internet what the normal average germination rate for carrot seeds are. And optimally you would get about 60% germination. So according to that, I would have 180 of my 300 Auxhart sprout and 90 of my black nebula seeds sprout. I can tell you first off, that didn't happen. I think my germination rate was probably closer to 40%, if that. I mean, I had a whole bed of carrots, but I definitely did not have like almost 300 carrots in that small space. I just did not. And in terms of the Auxhart carrots being almost half a pound, that was absolutely not true either. Like, even the biggest ones were like this big around, and I had like 2 or 3 of those. So nowhere near to even half a pound per carrot. And you know, that's probably on me for, you know, the method I was using gardening. I didn't thin them, I just scattered the seeds wildly, and I didn't cover them while they were germinating to help increase the germination rate. I also may have planted them a little early in the season, and so they were trying to germinate when it was a little colder outside. So the germination rate would have been lower because of that, and much of the carrots would have been smaller because they were pretty close together in most cases. And then there was a day when the clay hill behind the bed back there it was raining so hard that a lot of the clay kind of like washed into the back half of that bed, and that definitely put a dent in the carrots that were back there. So I would say, I could go look back at pictures, but I got like 2 bunches of carrots about this size, holding them all together from that 4x4 space, give or take, in optimal conditions. And then the math starts to break down a little bit, because it says I would produce 90 pounds of Auxhart carrots and 11.7 pounds of black nebula carrots. And this is in a 4x4 foot space. That doesn't sound right at all, because charts online say the average carrot yield per 100 square feet is 69 pounds, which is 0.69 pounds per square foot. So 16 square feet could produce 11.04 pounds, which sounds a lot more reasonable in terms of how much carrot you can produce in a space. And the average person, single person, needs between 10 and 20 pounds per year of carrots. So, okay, this 10 to 20 pounds per year of carrots, I have no idea where that's coming from. I feel like I would definitely eat more than that, but maybe I just eat a lot of carrots. So it sounds like I'm definitely in that range, but according to my calculations, I could have anywhere between 11 and 100 pounds of carrots, so it's definitely going to be somewhere in that range. In terms of my onions that I'm growing, I actually went out and just counted all of the onion plants that I have. Now, some of them look like kind of smallish, like maybe they'll never fully bulb up. But assuming that they all bulb up, all the ones that I currently... Spoiler, they did not all bulb up. I have 64 onions right now, and assuming they're an average of 4.34 ounces per onion, which is kind of on the smaller side, which is what I would expect. I don't think I have enough experience to expect that I'll grow like the maximum size onion. According to 4.34 ounces, which is 0.27 pounds per onion, I would be growing 17.28 pounds of onion. And that's a little below the recommended yearly. So let me tell you what happened with the onions. So I did a couple of things kind of weird. First of all, I ended up transplanting a lot of my onions halfway through the spring, and this is because I did not plan properly for how long they were going to take. I actually didn't know how long they were going to take because it's really hard to find that out. So I'm going to tell you now, if you are starting onions from seed in the fall and trying to harvest them sometime in the spring, then it's probably going to be after you've planted out tomatoes and peppers when those onions are going to be ready. So if you're planning your fall garden and thinking about, oh, well, like all of this is going to be gone by the time I'm doing summer planting, not at all. The 2 big ones that take up space longer than you think is your onions and your garlic. And so with the onions, I made the mistake of devoting a lot of good garden real estate to the onions, and I moved about half of them, I would say. Maybe more. Maybe it was more like 2/3 of them that ended up getting moved as I was interplanting the peppers and tomatoes in between where all the onions were in that same bed. And so some of the onions didn't get moved and, you know, got to grow up in that space. But I would say of those ones that never got moved, like, I didn't even really get onions as big as my fist. You know, they were all really small. And the ones that did get moved were teeny tiny, you know. So definitely did not get the onions that I was expecting here. Amount for a single person, which is 28 pounds. But that's still quite a lot of onion. See, in terms of, oh, and also the square footage for the onions that I'm using, it's a 4 by 8 foot area that I dedicated to onions there, so that's 32 square feet of onion. In terms of radishes, I have about 6 square feet that the radishes are in. The chart says that I should be growing in that amount of space about 0.66 pounds of radish, whereas the chart recommends 4 pounds per single person per year. If you guys have been following my channel, you've probably seen the radish incident. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. It's just that it was one of my first big failures in the garden this year. I had started growing black Spanish radishes, which I thought were cool, but it turns out that they take like over twice as long as a normal radish to grow. And like, I guess I knew that going into it, but it was still only 55 days, and I was like, this is not going to be a problem. But it was a problem, and basically I got 0 radishes. All of them bolted immediately. Although in this video, I wasn't considering radish pods as a harvest, and I do have a video on eating radish pods if you're interested, if this same thing has happened to you, and you can do it with like turnips and other brassicas, but basically the little seed pods kind of end up tasting a little bit like spicy green beans from radishes anyway, and are extremely edible, and that was actually a very prolific crop for me, unexpectedly. However, in terms of radishes, I got a big fat 0 on the radishes. So I'm a little bit below on that. But I also very highly densely planted my radishes, and one of the things to consider about this chart overall is this chart is an average based on planting rows, like as if you were farming this. So because I'm not planting in rows and I'm planting with minimum spacing, I probably am going to be growing more than what the chart predicts based on the square footage that I have dedicated to the radishes. But we'll see. I'll measure them and we'll find out. In terms of the turnips, I have about 4 square feet of turnips, so a little bit less than my radishes. According to the chart, that should give me something like 2.28 pounds of of turnip, whereas it recommends 12 pounds for a single person. The turnips actually didn't go so badly. The only thing is they took so much longer than I would have thought. This was another crop that I was like, oh, it'll be in the spring garden, it'll be out in time for peppers and tomatoes, like no big deal. And again, I found myself interplanting peppers and tomatoes in between clumps of turnips. I actually like was pulling up a bunch of baby turnips to make room for my peppers and tomatoes because those are more important to me. And I was like gathering from all of this that perhaps root vegetables in the spring for me maybe aren't the best idea. I'm trying all of this again in the fall season, so like going from warm to cold instead of from the cold to warm. And I'll also have a lot more time because my winters are so mild. I can likely grow longer into the winter than I can start in the early spring, if that makes sense. So I did grow some turnips. They were all pretty small turnips, and a lot of them were even baby-sized turnips, but I got a rough estimate. I didn't actually count any of these. Maybe like 30 turnips, 30 small turnips, you know? It wasn't a complete loss, but definitely not the sort of volume I was predicting here. So that's well below the average, but again, I am highly densely planting these across. Speaking of highly densely planting things, I think that the method that I used for that actually probably hurt my harvest. Basically, I just planted a lot of seeds, willy-nilly, and thinned very minimally. Like, I thinned a little bit, especially when they were really little, but I had been watching Charles Downing, and I saw his multi-sowing, and I was like, oh, well, like, when they grow right next to each other, they just push each other apart. And the thing I failed to consider is if they're pushing each other apart, they need the room on the other side of them, which I wasn't giving most of those plants. And so this fall, I'm trying proper multi-sowing with, you know, little groups of 3 or 4 that I'm starting beforehand. And doing it his way, and we'll see if that works better for me. But basically, yeah, I think a lot of my turnips were just really crowded out, and I had a lot that never even bulbed up because they just didn't have the room. Differently than how the chart is predicting that I would be planting them. So I can expect probably more, but I wouldn't expect that I would grow 6 times more than what the chart is saying I would grow. So I'm still not all the way up to what I would need for a year on turnips, but I think that's... Speaking of turnips for a year, I am still struggling with storage of those, and carrots too. I found if I left them in the fridge for too long, like a week, they would start getting like wrinkly and limp. So if anybody has like better tips on storing root vegetables, that'd be great, because what I grew in the spring would not have lasted very long at all if I hadn't eaten it. Gonna be okay. Let's see, garlic, I have 16 square feet, so a 4x4 plot dedicated to garlic. According to the chart, that means I'm growing about 3.2 pounds of garlic, and it says I need about 3 pounds for the year, so it looks like I'm pretty good with garlic for the year. I could go in and measure what I have left over still right now, but I'm guessing I got pretty close to that 3 pounds, and that's really surprising considering that most of the garlic that I planted was hardneck and not softneck. And those of you who've been seeing my videos know that that's a problem, because hardnecks need a period of cold that much longer than a softneck to kind of like activate them into bulbing in the spring and summer. And since it never really gets that cold here, my hardnecks weren't really activated into bulbing, and so like while they did split, they didn't like puff up at all. So I have a lot of like really small garlics, but I do have a lot of them, and they still taste like garlic. So it's not a complete loss. Like honestly, I can only improve from here by planting soft necks, and I think that this year it's going to go really well. Now the 2 big ones that I'm growing this year are sweet peppers and tomatoes. So for sweet peppers, I have several different varieties, and for ease of math, I just assumed bell pepper, because some of the ones I'm growing are much bigger than bell peppers and some are much smaller, and I figured bell pepper would be a good average, that I could get a lot of good... Most of the sweet peppers I've gotten, much smaller than bell pepper so far, by the way. Good numbers for, so that we can estimate about how much I'm going to grow. I'm going to have 17 plants of sweet peppers going in, and assuming about 6 to 8 peppers per plant, that means I'd have 102 to 136 peppers, at an average of half a pound each. For the one sweet pepper plant that actually is producing a lot, I think I've gotten more than 6 peppers off of it, but they have been small, like this big around maybe, and this long. Pretty small, but I think I'm gonna actually get a lot of peppers off of that plant. Each. That gives me between 51 and 68 pounds of peppers. And the chart only predicts that I need 6.5 pounds for myself. 6.5. They do not know how much I stir fry peppers and onions. Oh, that's the biggest reason I've been growing sweet peppers. But because they're so expensive in the store. Like, have you seen? Like $2.50 for a red bell pepper. Like, that's insane. However, my sweet peppers are not actually going all that well. I think what I did to myself was I got overexcited about the spring and the summer garden, and I think I planted them too early, like 2-3 weeks too early. And while they're alive, they're like just now starting to produce. I think that they're severely stunted because of that. Peppers really like it hot, and they like it warmer than tomatoes. My tomatoes are doing fine being planted out at the time they were because I put both of them out at the same time. But I think I should have waited on the peppers, because peppers that I personally started from seed that were planted out later in, for example, my mom's garden, and I had 2 left over that are planted in containers behind me that, like, I was gonna leave for dead, and I was like, well, I have these extra containers, I might as well stick them in. And they are already like so much bigger and bushier and about to produce a whole lot more than the peppers that I put out on time. So I think that next year I'm gonna have to make myself wait until something like May at least to put out my peppers. And it's hard to wait because you get so excited, but with like the evidence that I have, I know that the peppers will take off and grow bigger if I make sure that they have the warmth that they need right there at the beginning. So yeah, I'm doing great on peppers, making up for some of the lost harvests in other areas. In terms of tomatoes, I have 16 indeterminate tomato plants I'm going to be putting in. Tomatoes produce on average, according to the internet, 10 pounds per plant. So that means I'll have around 160 pounds of tomatoes. According to the chart, I only need 60 pounds for myself, so that's 100 extra pounds of tomatoes. So I could very easily make up for other food with... So the tomatoes are actually kind of the only thing that's going entirely according to plan. I put the plants in at the right time. They grew really nice and strong. I got them single stemmed up their little poles, and they are producing for me. I have not weighed all of the tomatoes that I have. 160 pounds sounds like too much though, based on like what I've harvested and what I still see on my plants, considering that it's about the middle of August and things are about to start petering out. So I don't know, if I had to estimate how many pounds of tomatoes I had, like maybe 50, maybe 60 pounds, something like that. I have been making salsas, I have been making sauces, I have been canning them, and by the way, if you've never made tomato sauce before, it takes so many more tomatoes than you think to make an edible amount of sauce. I'll do like 6 or 7 paste tomatoes and make like a regular sized jar of sauce. Like about half of that amount of sauce is like 6 or 7 paste tomatoes. So if you're like thinking, oh, I'm gonna make a big batch to can, you're gonna want like armfuls of your paste tomatoes to make your sauce. So just something to keep in mind if you've never experienced that. The tomatoes, there's so many sauces and salsas and all this other stuff I can make to make those really filling. Let's see, 2 more. I have beans. I just planted my beans actually. I have 48 plants that I put in of the bush variety. Assuming about 20 pods per plant, and assuming a harvest for pods and not beans. I use the average weight of a green bean because all the varieties I'm growing are going to be about green bean size, but they're going to be very, very pretty compared to green beans. I just keep watching this video and thinking, wow, I really had no idea, did I? So the bush beans that I put in containers, they were really crowded in those containers. And they were in containers, you know, so like they had a little less space to begin with. And so I would say I probably got like 4 beans off of each plant in those containers, if that. And they did not all come at the same time. So it wasn't like I got like a few good meals of beans. I got like 4 beans that I added to store-bought beans for dinner, you know. It was not that much, and I think I won't be growing bush beans, at least in containers again. Dragon's tongue. I've got another like red and white spotted one that I can't pronounce very well, and I can't remember what the third one is called that I planted, but they're all bush types, and so I use the average weight of a green bean, which is 0.012 pounds. So assuming 20 pods per plant, that's 0.24 pounds per plant, so about a quarter pound per plant. And with 48 plants, that gives me 11.52 pounds of beans. The other thing I didn't consider when I made this calculation was that one of the varieties of bush bean I was planting was black turtle beans, which those are shelling beans for drying. I don't know why I thought I was going to eat those pods like green beans. Which is about a third of the 32 pounds recommended by the chart. So not actually getting a lot of beans. In terms of potatoes, I have 10 plants out there. Potatoes will produce 3 to 6 potatoes per plant. So that means I'll have between 30 and 60 potatoes. And I planted potatoes of the russet variety. And so those are online it said between a quarter pound and a whole pound, so I went. Okay, so while I did plant russet potatoes, and while they did produce actually quite a few potatoes per plant, they were really, really small. Maybe my biggest potatoes were like this big. I mean, which is like a small russet, I guess, but most of them were like what you would consider like baby-sized potatoes. Like if you go to the store and you get the potatoes that are intentionally small, like that's about the size of potatoes that I had. And so, you know, I wasn't entirely wrong in the number of potatoes I got. I might even have gotten more, but it was not as much weight as I'm about to say. Took the middle, said half a pound per potato, so that gives me somewhere between 15 and 30 pounds of potato. And according to the chart, I would need 100 pounds for a year. And at this point, I guess I should really clarify, the chart is taking an average of the American diet. So 100 pounds of potatoes is including things like potato chips and french fries. It's not necessarily just counting your baked potatoes and your mashed potatoes that you might make at home for dinner. So having like 30 pounds of potatoes might actually be about what I need. Okay, so my potatoes did actually store really well, the ones that I saved, and I'm not sure how long they would have stored because I just finished eating them last week actually. So they stored for like about 2 months in between the time that I was eating them, and I wasn't eating a lot of potatoes in that time, so it wasn't like I had 2 months worth of potatoes. It was, you know, I had about maybe 5 meals of potatoes from what I grew, and that was, by the way, I had 4 like potting soil bags that I was planting in with my potatoes, and 2 smaller bags that I can only describe as what they are, which is Starbucks coffee bean bags. Not like the kind you buy normally, but like the big industrial kind that we use at the store. And those are like 5-pound bags of beans usually, I think. And so much smaller bags. The potting mix bags actually did work out pretty well, but I only had 4 of those. For myself, as somebody who doesn't eat a lot of potato chips or french fries. And again, what I'm working with here is a total of 80 square feet of bed space and 14 containers, and each container is about, I think those are 12-inch containers. So if you were to take some of the space that I'm allotting as bed space and make that container space, I believe that I could fit everything that I'm growing in the beds actually in containers in my yard. And I didn't really clarify that, but that's in more than 14 containers. I mean, I ended up getting more containers, as you can see. I mean, a lot of those are hot peppers, which I didn't talk about. But yeah, I severely underestimated what I needed in this video, and what I was going to get. And it's really interesting to go back and look at that, because, you know, this is me, like, when this was April 5th that I made that video. And so this is me, like, 4 months into deciding I'm going to, like, be really serious about gardening. I had gardened the previous year, but, like, this is me trying to get serious, trying to produce food, and, you know, I didn't know what I was doing. And if you're in that position, that's okay. That's entirely normal. Like, this is part of why I'm letting you see this, is because I don't want anybody to get this idea that people like me are just, like, magically really good at it, that we have some hidden talent or knowledge, or just like a green thumb, basically, that we just like naturally know how to grow plants. That's not true at all. You have to fail a lot and learn from those failures to become a good gardener. I think that this volume of food, at least for a single person, it's a little ambitious, but I think it's doable. It's a lot ambitious. Maybe doable in my, like, 4th or 5th year gardening. Like, I don't think that I'm going to produce everything that I just talked about, even this coming year, starting over, knowing everything that I know. But I do think that I'm going to continue improving year upon year, and I'm going to figure out how to maximize my space that I have, because I do have really limited space. And I'm going to figure out what works in the smaller containers the best, and what actually needs that really precious bed space to produce really well for me. And I'm not going to watch the rest of this video, because I'm pretty sure that I don't talk about any more of the stuff that I was growing. That sounds like everything that I grew. So I'm going to leave you guys here, but thank you so much for watching. Please do consider subscribing and liking this video, and I will see you guys next time. But until then, I wish you all happy gardening.